This is the Curatorial Roundtable, which is a weekly webinar with distinguished curators and directors of institutions, typically, though Farid is a special case. The purpose of the roundtable is really to just hear about different exhibitions, thinking about exhibition making, learn from people from all over the world. So today, to have Farid is a pleasure. Farid was incredibly generous to my program. When we went to Documenta last year, speaking with us. And Farid is a member of the artist collective, Ruin Grupa, with whom he co-curated Documenta 15, 2022 in Kassel. Farid trained as an architect at Universitas Indonesia and then at Cranbrook Academy of Art. And he's a visiting lecturer in the architecture department of Universitas Indonesia with Ruin Grupa. He also curated Sonsbeek 16 Transaction in Arnhem, the Netherlands, and as an instigator, as he writes, he has permeated or intervened in various global institutions such as Centre Pompidou, La Biennale di Venezia, Sharjah Biennial, the Biennale de Sao Paulo, and Basis for Actuelle Kunst, BAC. And with that, I will turn things over to Farid. I'll just add one thing. We go for about 50 minutes, at which point, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, please do so at the bottom of the screen in Q&A. So Farid, thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Hello, good evening from my side, but good morning, I think, from your side, Stephen. And then thank you very, very much again for having me. I think it has been a couple of times that we encountered, and then up until now it's been productive. Hopefully this time it will add to the relationship we had, like the way we in Ruang Rupa like to do. And then let me share my screen. I'm going to be, I think, to begin with, I'm going to explain a bit. Like, I'm going to not run through things linearly, but like introducing me and the practice related to contemporary art, let's say, mainly through my participation in the group Ruang Rupa from here, based in Jakarta, where I am right now. Zooming in this time, and then but I think I'm using I'm trying this is an attempt to try to weave things into, like, that's why it's non-linear, because what we like to say is actually most of the time that Documenta 15 is not a destination by itself, let's say, at least in our logic. And hopefully it will be also in our collaborators' logic and future collaborators, all those kind of stuff. So, and then it's something that we have been doing, and it enriches further what we're doing still, at least right now. Maybe I'll start with, there are some videos I want to start with. Yeah, I'll mute because I just like how it started as a music, but maybe many of you knew about Ruang Rupa already, but although I cannot assume anyone knows about Ruang Rupa in other parts of the world. Even in Jakarta, many people don't know. But we were known, as Stephen said before, as artistic director of Documenta 15, or the way we like to call it by now, it's Lumbung #1. This is kind of like the after or post-event video that the Documenta 15 created, the team of Documenta 15 created. But for us, taking this challenge of being part or contributing to a big Western institution, we didn't take it lightly, let's say. Maybe as the video showed, many of them, our collaborators, the people we're working with, the staff that managed to be part of the experience of the 100 days in Kassel, Germany, last summer, could be seen as for the lack of better words, from the global south. But we didn't, it was a consequence, let's say. We didn't start with that sensibilities or concern that we want to showcase majority from the global south, or the way we like to say it is ex-colonies, because global south was useful as a term at one point or another in the history, but I don't think we like to use it anymore, because it's such a reproduction or reproducing the binaries of South and North, let's say. But it was, for those of you, like Stephen said before, if for those of you who managed to go to Kassel last summer, I think there's no one way of experiencing Documenta 15. Even what I experienced, I couldn't say that it's much more valid or valuable than the person next to me. And then, like, you know, not related to the art world, even, all those kind of stuff. I think we thought about it as like a polyphonic experience. So it's not one and everyone needs to experience everything in order to understand, let's say. And then I'll continue with this. This is kind of like, I'm not going to run through everything in this video, but it's kind of like in a very short time a video that managed to kind of like summarize what we've done as Ruang Rupa before. It was founded in 2000. We started on the street as young artists. I wasn't part of the founding members because I only entered university around 2000, the time, 2000 exactly, the time Ruang Rupa was founded as well. So I knew them as student of architecture. And then I began to know them because they're talking about urban space, the way none of my architectural environment could provide, at least for me as a student at that moment. And then urban setting became a subject. Ruang Rupa, maybe some of you, I'm sorry if some of it's like I'm repeating things that some of you already know, but again, I cannot assume that everyone got introduced properly to Ruang Rupa. But as the name, Ruang is space and Rupa is like visual or fine, you know, like visual art is Seni Rupa, Seni is art. And then it was founded as by a group of artists, 6 artists. Only one of the founding members stayed up until today. It's Ade. And then we always started, like many collectors in Indonesia, taking over a domestic space. We rent a house and then we change the use into more public. So only around 2007, so 7 years after we moved around different houses, we started calling the space with names that are more related to art, like gallery or radio or shop, or office or library even. Before that, it's just like space that we just open. Sometimes it becomes an exhibition space. The uses were changing. Sometimes it's exhibition, sometimes it's workshop space, sometimes it's place just together. And then the way I knew about Ruang Rupa as well was like a, a place to stop by before going out at night. Because well, as students, of course, many of us couldn't afford drinking in clubs or cafes or bars or something like that. So it's just like a stopping point, let's say. So social setting kind of like enticed me as well to Europa. And then like many other students, like the one showing right now, this is a student forum started in 2002, because at that moment, the students from different disciplines felt the need to be for a forum, for a gathering place, no matter whether you come from art or not, but to update each other what's happening at that moment. And then in the end, it became an exhibition. It stopped in 2016 as well. So it's kind of like stopped being an exhibition. The initiatives continued, but because many students did, stop needing something like Ruang Rupa or Good School or anything else to facilitate this gathering. Another thing is like as Ruang Rupa, we also in 2003 started International Video Art Festival, not because we're experts in video art or because it started as video art, then it became media art, it became new media only without the art, etc., etc. But it's because like we're interested in the medium, because many of us started to direct music videos, making experimental movies, etc. But there's a lack of, again, a forum or how to be able to invite people who we want to invite, to learn from works that we want to learn from, etc. So it's kind of like through these beginnings, let's say, we learn how to make events, not necessarily only exhibitions, but events as vehicles to learn something more, to expand, to make new relationships, etc. And then I think like around mid 2000s, then after exhibiting ourselves as a group, so it's important for us to underline that our collective work is not like only some of individual works jumbled up together. International events like biennials, triennials, etc., start to pay attention to us. This is one of the most ambitious, let's say, of those projects in APT, Asia Pacific Triennial in Brisbane. And then this is the only work that has been collected from Ruang Rupa, let's say, up until now. Like a proper work by Kagoma, by the museum hosting the triennial. And then it just like using our relationship with an existing band, punk band from Bogor, a city next to Jakarta, and then imagining their history as if they were there during the political upheavals in Australia in the 60s and 70s. So that type of projects became kind of like our experimentations or our space to think about what we can do more. And then Sao Paulo Biennial in 2014, for example, then we started to find our ways of doing things. Many times, like the Asia Pacific Triennial before as well, we work with local initiatives or local artists, like from Brisbane, or this time it's from Sao Paulo, and then we open the space Like from before, it was kind of like a museum inside a museum, and then the works that we showcased and all those kind of stuff were sourced not only from our side, but also from collaborators in the localities. And here we just opened the space we got assigned for in the Biennial Pavilion, and then opening it up, imagining as if it's the Ruang Rupa House again in Jakarta, but in a much smaller scale, but still opening it and functioning it as if, like, opening it with the collaborators we met through the research trips in Sao Paulo, etc., etc. And then making karaoke's, making workshops with, like, it got activated, and it got filled actually by most of the time at that moment by people from Sao Paulo themselves. So we kind of like keep on doing it that way. Then I'll drink some water first while turning on the volume, because the music here is nice as well, from my taste at least. Hopefully you can. Okay, if the sound is not working, it's okay. I'll continue. But like music is one, as the Kuda before. Music is one of the things that we keep on doing up until right now. Some of us are musicians, some of course are more successful than others. I'm one of the non-successful ones, and I'm not playing music for public anymore by the time of speaking to you, at least right now. But music festival is something like we keep on doing, even like last year. In December, we managed to do this, the latest edition of Rekfest, Ruang Rupa Records Festival. And then movie as well, like this is the way, growing up at least as well for us. We know how to watch movies open air cinemas. Most of the time it's free, etc., etc. And then we use this kind of like popular culture because it's familiar to us to do things with our neighbors, most and foremost. But it's more than that. It's also kind of like a way for us to realize or like think about what we can do for the ecosystem. I'll come to the notion of ecosystem later. And then around 2000, after being around for 18 years, by the end of 2018, although it came as a surprise to us, Documenta, for those of you who don't know, maybe it's like one of the most spotlighted event in the contemporary art in Germany, in the city of Kassel, as I said before. Then they kind of like ask us as Ruang Rupa whether it's okay. It's not about us being candidate at that moment to start with, but it's okay for them to think about as a finding committee, that's what they call it, to think about us to become a candidate, like a possible candidate. And then we thought, after our experiences, both as artists and as well as curators, internationally, we thought hard actually whether we should even attempt or entertain the idea of doing something with Documenta, because it was really honestly maybe you've heard this before as well, not only from me, but from others, that it was something that was outside of our thought at that moment, that something like Documenta would be interested in doing something with us. And then the way we thought about it is like, in order for us not to be extracted for 3 years and doing a new agenda, we need to do what we wanted to do anyway, or what we've been doing anyway, in order for us to make sense, no? And then the notion of Lumbung, the title of Documenta 15, or the way we call it right now, no, the Lumbung 1, came from that. It's a vernacular word in Indonesian. It refers to rice granary. It came from agricultural tradition that a lot of Indonesians actually came from. Although most of us didn't come from that as either, like anymore, because like myself, I was born and raised in Jakarta, one of the megalopolis, so I never farmed a day in my life. But it's still a thing. It is still a vernacular word. Different people use it different way. For us, it's a shortcut to explain to each other what we're trying to do if we see ourselves as a bank of resources and we want to share ourselves to each other, not only as individuals, but also a collective. I'll talk about collective of collectives later. But because we started thinking about the sharing of resources, then we invited Documenta back originally, whether they could become interested in being part of the journey of us, of our journey. Of course, that journey would be altered, would be different than if Documenta wasn't part of it. But then they said yes after a process, let's say, not too long but intense. After intense process, they answered positively to the invitation, and then this is kind of like a diagram we first started with in order to explain what we're trying to do to Documenta by the invitation from us, like our invitation to them. And then, yeah, this is pre-COVID time. So we thought we still had the idea of a lot of physical ideas, which needed to be altered, of course, during COVID. Maybe I'll just like visit this very shortly. Although at that moment, it wasn't the first time we, as a group of artists, none of us, up until today, at least from the Ruang Rupa 9 members for Documenta, were trained classically as curators, but we played with the idea of curating many times, of course, from making our own events and running our own space, but also like this is Sonsbeek 2016 transaction in Arnhem, also a small city like Kassel. It's kind of comparable, I think 200,000 population or something like that in Arnhem in the Netherlands. And then this is a public art festival though, happening never regular, but they're trying to make it regular from 2016 every 4 years. Hopefully they can do it, although it's out, of course, it's not only it's outside of our power, let's say, whether they can do it or not. So it's in the park, and then in this moment we were still curating. Let's say we chose the works or the artists and the works that we want to work with. There's a specific site we designated as space or spaces for different artists, all those kind of etc. etc. It's still playing that role, but from this experience, actually, we realized how extractive it. I think this is 1 year or 1.5 years of a process, but then it was 2015 to 2016, and then at that moment we couldn't do what we're supposed to do in Jakarta. We realized it, so that's why, like, the idea of not repeating that lesson again, learning from the lesson we got from doing Sonsbeck, we came up with the idea of counter invitation because of that, let's say. And then this is kind of like not as ruang rupa, let's say, but many of us, including myself, got or learn about institutions, art institutions, by doing as well, by taking part of biennials, not only as artists, but also as organizers. Jakarta Biennial since 2009 actually kind of like gave us that opportunity, at least from 2009 to 2017, with like not always, but the 2011, for example, we didn't have anything to do with it. And then right now we're still questioning whether we should keep or what role we should play in the biennial itself. But because it's a different institution, different history, it started in the 70s by artists as well, all those kind of stuff. It wasn't international before. It started with a big painting exhibition, but then it became international, etc., etc. We learned what's the possibility of institutions through this kind of possibilities. As you can see, the space for Jakarta Biennial 2015 was taking place in the new found at that moment was an ex-warehouse. And then through that, it was abandoned at that moment in the center of the city. And then we thought by finding it and using it for a biennial, for a Jakarta Biennial edition, then it would be a missed opportunity if we didn't think about it as a space resource as well, and then what we could do with it. And then it became this in 2017 to the end of 2016 up until the end of 2018. We, after moving from house to house, like many other collectives, we asked Jakarta-based collectives other than us whether it makes sense for us to gang up together and rent this ex-warehouse. And it became this, what it's called Gudang Sarina ecosystem. This is the place when we started to play with the notion of resources sharing together. And Lumbung itself was coined firstly during this time. And then also the collective of collectives were also kind of like came to our realization around this time as well, because we run this space and share this space with other initiatives. How far can we push the collaboration, let's say? So it's not only about Ruang Rupa anymore. It's not only about Serum anymore. It's not only about Grafis Ruhara anymore. It's etc. etc. The list goes on. But it became because it's still rent, which was expensive because it's big, and it was also a scale. We learned not to be too big. It was too big for us. I think in square meters, I'm sorry, I cannot convert automatically to feet, which is more familiar to many of you, I assume, but it's kind of like 6,000 square meters indoor only. I'm not counting the outdoor spaces, but this 6,000 square meters proven to be too big for us, and then we learn from it as well. We don't want to be too big. Although, as many of you can say as well, even Documenta 15 became too big. We realized it in retrospect, it became too big, yes. And then, again, if any of you has seen this illustration before, I'm sorry to be a broken record, but I think it's important that this counter invitation, this meandering journey, this notion of river, which they can bifurcate, they can even side stream, they can be a new stream, etc., was important for us. The pre, the during, and the post That's how we think about it. So that's why Momenta 15 is not only a destination for us, but it's a vehicle to go somewhere else, let's say. And then maybe some of you who came to Kassel saw this diagram. It was hand painted on a wall in one of the spaces. It's actually our space, Luru House. And this is just like a small animation using the very same diagram. But as you can see, it got the journey, at least our journey from our perspective, got altered a lot. One by COVID, of course, that we couldn't go anywhere. Well, the plus side of things is just like our carbon footprint as artistic directors, at least, were not were kept in check, especially 9 people. You know, imagine if we could going around different places, and then how much of carbon footprint we left just by making Documenta 15. But then it's also with the war of Ukraine and Russia, and also with COVID, traveling was made much more difficult. Many of us came from contexts where, like Indonesian passport holders, for example, we need to ask for visas going anywhere, almost anywhere in the world. And then it was proven that it was one of the things that kind of like a big force in finding like the Lumbung, interlocal Lumbung sensibility, let's say. And then we're, as I said before, I think, or maybe I didn't, but we continued after Gudang Sarina. It was too big and it was still rent. We continued by actually purchasing this, not too small, but smaller, much smaller than compared to the 6,000 square meters. It was a mini football arena before, so we didn't have to build any roof. We didn't have to ask for building permission, etc. We just, from this is the original, the early days when we bought the land to become this, we kind of like got to put containers inside it. No architects, no building permit, as I said before. And then we also rent the land adjacent to it, and then we turn it into studios. So not only artists, but designers, publishers, photographers, even outdoor sport organizers, etc. They could, or they can rent it. Up until now, it's full of that, and then it's part of our ecosystem, and it's called Good School. Actually, we not only Ruang Rupa founded this, but we co-founded it with Serum and Grafis Suruhara, and we turned ourselves, after a long talk during Gudang Sarina, what we could become. And then what we could become, we figured out maybe an informal school, because we can't, still up until now, we can't afford to be formal. Many of us didn't even many of us drop out, let's say, from formal educational system in Indonesia. So even then, and then we're not interested in taking that, at least for up until now. Maybe in 5 years it will be different, you never know. But to take that bureaucratic route to become formal and recognized, let's say, by the system, it's just like too much hassle. We just we call it Good School, study in collective and ecosystem building in contemporary art. So what we knew after at that moment as Ruang Rupa 18 years were just like how to make collectives and to build ecosystem ourselves. No, some of us, or no, not some of us, some people actually call it world building, whatever. You can come up with different understandings of it if it's helpful for you, but that sensibility actually kind of like to share a space together with others, seeing it as a resource. And then also we became slowly but surely, right now we can become transparent to each other, even economically, financially. So and any one of us from our group can see each other's bank account, for example, in any given month, in order to figure out who has the surplus, who has deficit, etc., etc. So again, for Documenta, for example, this is from Documenta 15, one of the main venues, or considered to be main venues of every edition of Documenta, is a building called Fridericianum. Then we turn it into our understanding, at least, of a school. And then this is the ground floor, one of the main spaces. And then through the process, artists meeting other artists, way before the exhibition started, through Zoom, unfortunately, but then decisions were made by them, not necessarily with us. Of course, we got informed in a lot of time, but not necessarily decisions need to be made with us all the time. But they turn it into a library, they call it, or we call it, Frick School Library, and this is the library space. It's used in different ways, from holding events up until reading events, reading a room as well, storing materials, etc., etc. And then through an assembly, or what we call out in our language, it's majelis. It's useful in Indonesian, but also it came from Arabic. So many people actually know this word from the collaborators as well. We figure out a way to support each other, or sometimes even some of us decided to opt out from the process. Of course, it's okay as well. It's part of life as well, I would think. And then we don't force collaboration, but we provided routes to do so, and we campaign for it. You know, we supported any kind of collaboration. So artists are not only busy thinking about their work, their individual separate works, but also how to use a building like Fridericianum, which is like one of the oldest museums in Europe, for example, how to see it as a resource and share it further. And then also, like that, I said that diagram before, the timeline was shown in this building. It's called Ruru House. This is nothing new. We for us, this is our, for a lack of better word, let's say a curatorial method, how to land in a context that's foreign for us, but not as much as possible. Although, of course, we're still going to be foreign, but not as an alien, let's say. The way we thought about it, or still think about it, is actually to open a space. Again, it's just because that's how we know how to do stuff we want to do, no? Based on our past experiences. It didn't need to be this big, or to be honest, but because of many other things, like the workers from the institution of Documenta needed place to work as well, so it became an office, all those kind of stuff. So this ex-shopping mall, let's say, or shopping center, not a mall maybe, but a shopping center, was vacant, and then Documenta rented it from 2021. Yeah, a year, no, more than a year, one and a half year before the exhibition opened. Of course, during COVID, we couldn't function the space as we're supposed to, or we intended to be, but still, it plays an important role how we form our approach, let's say. This is what can be said about it. Like, as I said, it's nothing new. We did the same in 2016 as well for Sonsbeck, although it was much smaller. It was just like a shop front but it's not a program space. It's not that we're coming with a program. It's much more a space that we can get to know what's already there and how we can support and what's useful, what kind of fruitful collaborations could come up from a context such as Arnhem in this case, or Kassel in this case. And then this is kind of like neat, but in practice, conceptually, it's helpful, but in practice, of course, it's so much messier than this. But in Good School, we thought about our practice with 3 pillars, let's say. One is the school itself, which is knowledge, or the Good School, the regular program with participants, regular workshops, shorter workshops, not a year program, etc., etc. There is a business unit or sustain, what we call it, like unit that think about sustainability strategies. Most of the time it's finance, but although not only, to take over commercial projects, let's say, so we can support programs that cannot be funded through funding open calls, etc., etc. For those of you who know Indonesia a little bit, maybe it's not a regular way, like unlike some parts of Europe, Western Europe, for example, that's like national funding supported artistic practices. Not the case up until today. It gets better and better in Indonesia, but in that sense, but still like incomparable, let's say. So how to sustain not only writing proposals for fundings or going directly only for commercial projects, but to find our way as well to sustain our practices. This part is still the one that we're still talking a lot to each other actually about up until today. Yeah, this is Good School right now, and then I think I'm about to close. But after Documenta 15 closed in September 2022, last September, we took a rest for a while. But then since November, assemblies or majelis, big ones, happen already in, or still happening in Good School. Even today, there's a new, there's also another majelis, and it's for everyone of us to come. And if it has happened, maybe like we lost count by now, I think like 30 something. Myself, I'm still in a break, which everyone knows because I'm doing a stay-at-home dad function since since October up until still right now, but slowly getting back because it's coming back to an end. My phase of stay-at-home dad. But then so I haven't been able to attend every assemblies, let's say, or every majelis. But yeah, these kind of things are happening right now. We're talking about many things, especially how to continue from how we pay ourselves or consider ourselves as resources, what is possible for us, what is impossible for us to get going. As I said before, there's like events for us, exhibitions, are vehicles. As public festivals, OK Video started in 2003, stopped as being a festival in 2017. It started to become a lab when we moved to Good School, but then just like a couple of weeks ago, we opened the next phase, let's say, so celebrating 20 years of OK Video. It started with archive, of course, from 2003 up until now, what we've achieved, how many works we've amassed, and all those kind of stuff, because we digitized many of them, maybe not all, but at least more than 70% of the works we digitized. We didn't show, of course, because of the permission, but still we think about that as a resource. And then this is also a preparation for the next. What could OK Video be? If we stop being a festival, what could it be? And then after the never-ending assemblies as well, how could event like OK Video feedback to where we're at the moment, you know? So archive actually has become important, although we're not, I have to be honest, we're not archiving creatures naturally. So it's disparate. It's difficult to, if we don't have good centered archiving archiving bodies, let's say, but it's still doable and it's still valuable, I think. And then yeah, so we are still using this sensibilities of using events and exhibitions and workshops, etc., as vehicles, let's say, how to go next. Documenta 15 is not exempt of it. We are also using it that way. And I think hopefully it's not too short, but I think I'm stopping it right here. Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you. So as I said at the beginning, this is a time for the audience to put questions or comments in the Q&A at the bottom. Certainly, it's a huge practice with lots of moving parts. Okay, so here is a question. Do you view your way of curating art making as activistic? That's the first.
Yeah.
After that.
Yeah. Should I answer it directly?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a good one, and it has come up a lot of times, including internally. Because we work with proper activists, those people who consider themselves to be activists, it's also their livability. So as curators as well, with curators, we take care of calling ourselves, or what we do as curation, or calling ourselves curators. Calling ourselves as activists, also we have kind of like we're not really comfortable doing it, but we more and more we understand where it's like at least the curiosity coming from, because we criticize the activism works as well, the way our activist workers or our activist friends kind of like criticize our type of art making as well, on a daily basis almost. What we can say is that it's consequential. Many of our interest lies in precarity, you know, and how to sustain certain artistic practice when there's almost no support for it. Then that's why we collaborate, or we learn from others throughout like the years as well. How do they sustain? What kind of strategies can they put in place in order for them to keep on going? And then, of course, a lot of this precarity came from one context that's not easy. So issues, political, many of times, came as a cause, no? And activism came as part of the reason why people do art in this context. And in Jakarta itself, why we keep on going up until today, why we became Good School as well, for example, is because we see many holes still that we can fill. How we can fill it is by sharing what we've gone through, and that's through collectivism and collectivity. So that's why we're brave enough to call ourselves as study for collective and ecosystem building, for example. Because in the schools, although like many of artistic lives in Indonesia have been sustained through collective practices, but in formal school, like this is not different from you, I would say, like many of you, that it was still like collective way of doing things were still not not put a spotlight on, although in reality it was one of the strategies. So we could contribute to it, let's say. We're not saying that what's already there or available is bad. We're just thinking that it's not enough, at least from our point of view. So it became, if people see it as activism to a certain extent, then maybe it is. But again, it's not because we want to do activism works, I would say, but we have to touch upon those modes of working in order for us to be consistent of why we're still here, let's say. I hope it started answering the question itself.
Okay. So next from Sam, what were some of the challenges you and the group faced during Documenta 15 when producing work in such a complex and participatory process?
Yeah, thank you again. Many. We felt a lot as well. And challenges like, as I said, no, COVID, Russia and Ukraine war, conflicts in many places in the world provided that already anyway, with or without us doing Documenta 15, but like to know each other, to visit each other, to really build affinities with each other. I think it's always challenging. Time, and maybe like I can touch upon two particular topics, time and space. We're lucky. We know that something like Documenta is luxurious in time because we're working for Documenta 15 at least 3 years. No, it's not normal. Like many of these events, maybe they're working as biennial, for example, then the effective working time is only a year or less. We wouldn't be able to do it that way. And then, or triennial, then maybe it's 1.5 year, etc., etc. So we were lucky, but still, even then, with the ambition we put on, I think we're still too ambitious. Then, like we wish we could spend more time not productively thinking about making an exhibition, but actually to know each other first. Again, through COVID, it makes it at least double as difficult. And then it's a good segue to come to scale in the end because we keep on extending invitations. We extend invitations to our artistic team. When we extend the invitations further to Lumbung members, as you can see in the timeline, then we keep on extending this invitation to Lumbung members to others, artists to others, and all those kind of stuff. And also because we were not steadfast enough to say enough is enough ourselves, then it became too big. Then intimate, no, like it's a good analogy, the X warehouse space with the houses we came from. When it was houses, then it makes sense for our sensibility to keep on happening. With the X warehouse, it's much more difficult. With people hanging out in different spots, for example, then it's not the feeling of intimacy were not kept. It's really difficult to keep that. Sorry. But also we fell into the trap of keep on doing more things and becoming bigger and becoming more and more and more and more and more, basically. Maybe not in the publication part, but at least in the space part, in how many venues and all those kind of stuff. We should, at one moment or another, we should say, no, this is it. Let the process of, like, finding collaborators, at least for Documenta 15 or Lumbung 1, stop right here. And then we kept on going with this, instead of like keep on actively looking for people we want to learn from and all those kind of stuff, because of the logic of invitations keep on being extended. So it became what you knew or what you experienced. Although it's still okay, we're still happy and we're still proud of what we did. We ask people too much as well, too much time in Zoom, too much time on assembly, on doing majelis and all those kind of stuff. Although it is vital in the process, in our process at least, but we know that it's hard. Zoom make it again double, triple harder. Imagine an assembly, Zoom assembly with whatever 200 to 300 screens, not talking about participants, because one screen might be 5 people, 10 people, 2 people, 1 people, whatever, but 200 to 300 screens at one go, and then it happens the whole day in order to have every time zones participating. For us, even it was too big. That's why resting from the experience of Documenta 15, let's say, is paramount as well, not only for us in Ruang Rupa or the artistic team or the people who work in the institution, but also for our collaborators, whether they're official artists or part of the ecosystem that we're working with. So maybe, hopefully it's not too long.
Okay, so there are just a couple more people who have asked. So Gabriella asks about archiving. With this lack of archiving, do you think the most important thing on these all is the experience? Looking forward to Lumbung 2.
Thank you. Maybe before Lumbung 2, it's like Lumbung 1.1, 1.01 or something, before we get to Lumbung 2, even taking the analogy of the tech analogy, but hopefully it will happen. So thank you for that. And then we know by experience as well that actually talking like this format of talking to you, representing or all those kind of stuff is not the best format of understanding what we're doing, because it's, as Stephen said as well before, like it is many things. It can become dumbfounding or confusing, although we like to be confusing, given that, like, full disclaimer on that, but it's actually much more faster and much more suitable, let's say, not faster, but suitable, because it needs a lot of time. And we're asking a lot of that as well to each other, including the audience that experience us, like sitting down together with us, experiencing. For Documenta 15, for example, Good School opened a kitchen behind Fredericianum. Spaces like that. Brito opened a kitchen as well, and then Cinema Caravan moved around their sauna with parties all the time. Those type of spaces are much more useful in understanding us. or different facets of our practice, let's say. But because it cannot be, again, like, I don't think any of us are even have the illusion of having a clear definition by this point of like what ruang rupa is. What ruang rupa is at this moment for me might be different than ruang rupa was a couple of days, or ruang rupa will be, let alone for others. So I think, but by experiencing something like, a party, let's say, we can talk about a party from one end to another. We can describe it, we can represent it, we can say that how important it is, how groundbreaking certain parties are, all those kind of stuff. But unless we're there, I don't think we can understand it fully, like, just talking because you're based at SVA, at least based in New York City, like this is very popular maybe, or like, but Studio 54, talking, looking at pictures of that, it would be different than actually experiencing it. That's why archiving, we're thinking about this as well in the last few years, much more and more, how to not center archive, how to decenter it more, how to disperse it, actually much more nicer than decenter, because we never have a center anyway for archiving, at least. So how to disperse it, how to not making an archive being owned by a group of people, let alone by one person only. How to practice it, how to practice archive, how to make archive alive. That's why also we collaborated, or we invited archiving practices from Asia Art Archive, Black Archives, Archive de la Femme from Algeria, from Algiers. All these type of practices became, or Sada, from Iraq, became proper learning experiences for us throughout Documenta 15, doing Documenta 15. So there is no one direct answer to archiving, let's say. Up until now we have, but we're trying, we're making a lot of attempts, especially this is maybe a teaser, especially because in 2025 we're going to turn 25-year-old. We celebrated quite hugely when we're 10 years old. We didn't really on 17, like a small one. We thought we could do 21-year-old, but didn't happen because of COVID and many things. And then maybe 25-year-old in 2025 will become something. And archiving, of course, naturally is becoming a part of it.
All right. So the last question is from Michael. Do you have a collective printmaking facility? If so, how does it work?
This is also important one, I think, talking about the future of Lumbung. One is in Good School, Grafis Ruhara is a collective of graphic artists. That said, they have the like silk screen printing, woodcut, lino, what's that? Riso printing machine and all those kind of stuff. And it's nice to have them. Although it's only now I think I'm going to learn more about that, because I didn't come from many of us came from this or like Ade, for example, like print making artist. But so we have that, not the state of the art by any sense, but we have that. And then I think like it makes sense for like graphic works, especially because it has multiples, it can be understood as things. It's much more democratic, let's say. That's why also video art makes sense, because it's not supposed to be a one-off thing. photography is supposed to be as well, but I think it's another thing. I'm not going to touch upon the discourse of photography right now. I think it's impossible. But that part of printmaking, I think, was the one kind of like enticing us. That's why a lot of collectives as well, at least in Indonesia, work this way, from photography, filmmaking, collectively as well, not like regular filmmaking, publication, up until like, woodcut, etc., etc. And Riso, of course, making zines, etc. Then it's kind of like hand in hand with collective practices. We found out it's not a surprise that way. And then the last one, maybe it's Lumbung Press. Lumbung Press is one of the, I don't know whether you understand, you figured this one out yet, but there are, because of a lot of majelis, a lot of collaborative works between Lumbung participants. There are a lot of working groups. One of the working groups, the most active one, was Lumbung Press. We managed to rent first and then bought printing machines. We staged it in an exhibit, one of the exhibition spaces, one of the central as well, historically, the Documenta Halle. Just like kept on printing for 100 days and more. And then afterwards, we didn't know how it would continue, but then it found its own life afterwards. Right now it's in Barcelona, actually, being hosted by one of the Barcelona institutions called The Hanger, but also not only by The Hanger, but also other group of institutions and initiatives in Barcelona. And then it's one of the initiatives or the working groups that has been very useful as well during 100 days and after. We're thinking about how to continue Lumbung sustainably, financially as well, and Lumbung Press hopefully will play a big part in it. At least I can say that.
So there is one more question, and then we'll have to end. We're a little over. Dixie asks, is there a place in your curation for the expression of new views on traditional arts of Indonesia, like carvings?
We don't know whether what we're doing is contemporary. Well, actually, no. Like a lot of people in Indonesia, for example, called us out by using Lumbung, because it's like, as if we're exoticizing ourselves, sorry. So we could be seen in European eyes, we're primitive as well, some of the views of our practice is actually kind of like, but we had this a long time before, why should we revisit that? Our own practice, because like we come from Jakarta, we cannot represent Indonesia, but at least we can be honest that our sensibilities were owned in Jakarta, and we're very much Jakartan creature. So of course, traditional art practices have their own place in the artistic ecosystem in Jakarta, for example, not as big as in Solo or in Bali, maybe, or in different places in Indonesia. But in Jakarta, yes, there are some places. The things that we learn a lot from them, like Aman. What is that? Like the indigenous group of Indonesian natives, or traditional societies. That's the way we call it, because indigenous is not a term used in Indonesia, in Indonesian language. But traditional society, it's how we call it. Yeah, we know them, for example, we learn from each other. Hopefully, at least they learn from us as much as we learn from them, because many of times we learn from them. Because of this friends, let's say, or this relationships with others, we know we don't have to play in that game. But when it becomes sustainable, like the question of how to sustain specific art practices, especially the ones that is functioning in real life, then something like Agus Nur Amal PM Talk, an artist as well in Documenta 15, we invited him. We invited him really early on, or we worked with him really early on of Ruang Rupa. His practice is actually based on the traditional storytelling tradition of Aceh, the northern, the northwestern part of Indonesia, the tip of Indonesia, for example, something like that. Like he's still practicing it, but in a different way and making his own. And then it's always working with others, with children, with workshop participants, etc. Then it becomes naturally interesting for us, and then we keep on we keep on working with him. Let's say we think of him as a never-ending part of our ecosystem. Theater as well, like the ones that very grassroots for street children. This said like many of Jakartans are migrants from other cities, so different traditions came as a part of it, not necessarily driven by it or trying to make it a heritage, let's say, because when it becomes a heritage, then many other people can do it better than us. It's not our interest as well, but when it makes sense, it is great. And then other ways as well, voodoo from Haiti and all those kind of stuff, as you can see as well already. It's not why we're inviting, so a traditional form of art is not why we're working with others, other initiatives, but it's part of it. Again, it's consequential. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we will end the public session. Thanks so much, Farid, for doing this, and take a deep breath, and we'll see you on the other link.
Yeah, hopefully it's useful for everyone attending. See you.
Thanks. Bye to everyone.